3-hour SpongeBob SquarePants marathon kicking off in
Western animated cartoons. I've watched them, you've watched them. Whether it's the 2010s or the 90s, they have always been around, giving television watchers something to enjoy, a pleasant and vivid distraction from the outside world. Oftentimes, especially prevalent during the 20th century, you had adaptations of existing media given the cartoon treatment. Whether they were critically acclaimed movies, popular video games from the earliest generation of consoles, a hodgepodge of all kinds of characters from different franchises, or the fricking Stanley Cup winning NHL team. It was an era where if anything existed, there was surely a loose adaptation of it produced for Saturday morning TV. And loose was a loose term for it. There was a push for silliness and a serialized formula, both of which would be the regular format for Western cartoons. While recognisable hallmarks of the things they adapted would be lost or irrevocably altered, that's not to say they're without merit. The Real Ghostbusters, an unofficial sequel/spin-off of the supernatural comedy movie, and released 2 years after, was extremely different in how it changed the cast personalities and toned down the horror to better suit a younger demographic. But that didn't stop viewers from tuning in to enjoy it. It still has its fans today, to the point where elements of said cartoon would be adapted as a video game in 2023, effectively making it canon to the franchise. People still hold these old shows in high regard, either through nostalgic memories of watching memorable episodes, as an appreciation for the media and how it's diverged from canon sources, or for the memes.
Link!
Oh boy, smooching time!
And here we arrive at the Blue Boy, Sonic the Hedgehog. He was not spared from the wave of loosely based cartoon spin-offs, getting multiple shows over the course of a decade. It all started with the television production company DiC, who, hot off the trails of their Mario-based cartoon, Super Mario Bros. Super Show, which was definitely a thing,
Have a little piece of spaghetti on your overalls.
would create what would soon become Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog. Broadcasted shortly after the release of Sonic 2 on the Mega Drive, this cartoon certainly has its quirks, showcasing perhaps the zaniest interpretation of its cast. I'll go more in depth later on in the video, but the main things to note for the time being are the beyond quirky characters, both recurring ones and those seen in the background, and the main antagonist, Dr. Robotnik, being a little more eccentric in his design and personality. And then they made a game about it. This tile-matching game, akin to Tetris or Columns, also called Dr. Robotnik and His Mean Bean Machine in Europe, outside of the UK, was the only video game based in the Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog universe. Instead of the typical side-scrolling and platforming gameplay fans had come to expect, a crew within Sega of Japan would create a slow-paced puzzle game centered around stacking rows of beans and outbeating atypical opponents. Well, create wouldn't be an accurate term. What it was, and what fans would soon discover, turned out to be a reskin of a game from one of Sega's other properties, Puyo Puyo, specifically the 1992 release on the Mega Drive. These games didn't see overseas releases until the early 2000s, so I don't think it's incorrect to assume that this game was many a fan's first introduction to these colourful guys. And with this game, I shall start my intricate, possibly exhausting analysis on this funny little game and the Sonic cartoons that were released before and after. Buckle up, ladies and gentlemen, and everyone in between. Along with the game's predecessor, Puyo Puyo, Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine has the exact same gameplay at its core. For the main scenario, you play as someone going against a long line of opponents controlled by AI, or computer players as my younger self would call them, until confronting the main antagonist at the end in a climactic final battle with different music playing. The field on the left is where you place your beans, or Puyos in their source game, and the opponent is in their own separate one. By moving the beans around and rotating them, and connecting 4 of the buggers together, either horizontally or vertically, this action can send out translucent grey ones to dump into the other's area. I love all the different combinations of connected beans. They look so goofy sometimes. Chain a combo of these things, and the resulting cascade of redundant beans can turn the battle in your favour. The same can happen to you, and it's especially annoying when one lands where you were planning to do business. God damn it. However, to alleviate this, you must create combos near the junk blobs to remove them. The aim of the game is to fill up your opponent's field until they have no space to drop any more beans, leaving them in utter disbelief as Puyo fireworks go off in your area. If you end up filling your side up, the beans all drop and appear for a few seconds as little beanie angels. Sorry for putting you to death, little guys. Both of these boards are 6 beans wide and 13 beans tall. I counted. This allows you and your opponent to hold a total of 78 beans, which I believe is a fair and balanced space for the gameplay. It leaves you just enough room to plan out combos without making you feel like it's too closed in. Also helpful is that for a couple of seconds after your beans have landed, you can still rotate them if necessary, at the cost of giving the opposition more time to place theirs. I'm pretty terrible at these sort of games, but that doesn't mean I can't appreciate how finely tuned it is. The difficulty is set to normal by default, but you can change it in the options if needed. This adjusts the intelligence of the enemy's skill and also when in the campaign beans start falling quicker. Other modes in this game include a 2-player competition mode, which have a selection of difficulty options as you compete against the peep with the other controller, and exercise mode, which acts as a solo simulation to practice your skills and outbeat your own score. It will go on forever while gradually increasing the difficulty. It's also the only time you see this happen. What are you? So what's the story of this quirky block stacking game? Well, it's simple. Set in the world of the cartoon, Dr. Robotnik, hater of happiness, and his mechanical cronies are kidnapping all the bean inhabitants from Beansville in an attempt to snuff out the fun and turn them into killer drones. He achieves this by means of his mean bean steaming machine. Look at their roboticized forms. Imagine fighting these in a Sonic game. It's your job, either the player, Sonic himself, or has been, it's very unclear, to confront each of these goons, stacking the beans together to free them, until eventually defeating Dr. Robotnik himself and exploding the titular machine, freeing all of the colourful, jovial inhabitants in the process. Not the most engaging of stories, and about on par with Sonic 1, but the art and portraits certainly make it worthwhile. Robotnik's sprite animations try to elicit the zany style of the cartoon with its erratically, almost schizophrenic mannerisms. Look at the guy go! The rest of the cast, which consist mostly of his mechanical bounty hunters from the first episode, aren't as fluidly animated, though they are still accurate to the show's art style. I do generally enjoy the way opponents are shown 2 at a time on the stage board, as well as the little dialogue scenes with them standing in the way of your journey, before the perspective changes and goes to the underground dungeons where the bean stacking takes place. Their characterization is minimal and mainly consists of puns, but then again, most of these guys aren't that well defined anyway. Speaking of which, let's go through each of the campaign's opponents and the rest of the characters. We may as well while we're here. Arms is the first to be fought and is the easiest opponent in the game due to how much time it takes for him to do anything. Frankly, seems like a tougher enemy due to how he slams the beans with enough force to make the dungeon shake, but that's just to fill the bottom 4 rows with beans. Humpty has a meek disposition, but he is a little more capable of making combos. Love this goober. Coconuts is the lowest ranked of the recurring cast, which makes sense because of his demotion to monkey janitor, and his technique involves stacking each side of the board with beans, although this usually just makes him less challenging as a result. Davy Sprocket is a clear reference to those pioneering Western figures, and like most of them, he is aggressive in his techniques. His cutscene is also the first to use the somewhat more serious intro music. Squeal is a blob on wheels with pig-like features, though don't underestimate him. He is incredibly quick on the draw in removing beams, and would often unceremoniously end runs when I first played it. I like all of his portrait animations though. Dynamite is a living detonator that is inexplicably skilled in puzzles. He focuses on making overly elaborate combos, but can easily be interrupted by a repeated chain of your own. Love how he blows up when you beat him. Grounder is an idiot in the cartoon, evidently being a green version of the badnik of the same name, but likewise with the other opponents around the midpoint of this game, he will give you crap. His techniques, I think, are a combination of the previous guys, and he and Scratch also have extra sprites for when they appear in cutscenes alongside the Doctor. Spike looks and acts a little like a turd. Beans fall faster, and the enemy AI removes them like they're nothing. Big combos are a must at this point. Sir Fuzzy Logic certainly looks like a tough opponent, and I like that he has a constant ominous wind blowing around him. Same as before, if slightly less tough to beat. Dragon Breath looks like a dragon, but has never been seen breathing fire. Do your best to intercept his technique with more devastating combos. Scratch is the penultimate opponent, and is also somehow more intelligent than his cartoon self, which is partially based on the Clucker badniks from Sonic 2. He has a shit-eating grin when on the verge of winning, and I'm only now realising that the main henchmen are pretty much the last opponents of their metaphorical areas before the music changes, like gate bosses. Dr. Robotnik is almost the main character of this game. His name is on the title, his visualage appears on most screens in some form, and he physically appears in cutscenes and in the game over screen, where he laughs at you if you don't hit continue. He makes that same laugh when he defeats you in the final battle, and when you beat him, he sounds like the sound of an enemy despawning in, like, fricking Golden Axe. Other characters are the Bean Folk, I suppose they count. While they typically retain the look of the Puyos from their game of origin, in cutscenes they have a more anthropomorphized look to them, and possess arms and heads. If I had to guess, it would be due to the separate artistic licenses that they couldn't replicate it for that and the box art. They're different franchises after all. The beans come in 5 different colours, each with their own set of sprites. Refugee beans made from chain reactions are a transparent grey colour, and big beans which appear in exercise mode are green and slam right through 2 columns of the board, clearing any little ones in the way. Has-Been is an interesting character. In gameplay, he kind of acts as the referee, signalling the start of a match and staying within his little box, and other than that he doesn't serve any other purpose. The US manual describes him as a fun little guy that acted as a test subject for the roboticized, but I don't know, he seems normal enough to me. In the Puyo Puyo series, where he is the mascot character, he has about the same role in early games, but with a different backstory, and is also called Carbuncle, after the gemstone, not the Final Fantasy summon. Hey you, yes you, if you happen to like what you're seeing and want to see more of these kinds of videos, be sure to let me know in the comments, and please like and subscribe if you can. It helps a lot. Some sound effects also had to be rearranged and replaced, evidently because the cutesy nature of the original arcade game would just not fly in Western culture in the 90s. It was all about looking and sounding cool after all. Instead of stringing combos and having the music interrupted by cute clips of Japanese phrases, the giddy cheer of "Yippee!" are heard, increasing in pitch as the accumulated chain goes on. On the enemy's side, their combo sound is a crunchy sounding "Yeehaw!" And while originally nuisance Puyos made an innocent sounding bling sound when landing, in this game refugee beans do a deep little laugh, giving them a bit of a villainous edge, especially when they land in your grid. God damn it! The OST of this game is relatively short, but decent. Most of it consists of slight remixes of the Genesis version of Puyo Puyo, but I'll save those till later. The title music is a very impressive first impression, starting with some crackling thunder with Robotnik's face in the background, and then bringing in the mechanical beeps and clunks as the rest of the title comes into frame. I also like how you can bounce the beans on the menu. The main menu, as well as the options and the high score screens, shares this relaxed yet catchy theme that really grabs me, especially when played against that cloudy background from Sonic 1. I know those clouds, I grew up with those sprite sheets in my teens. The music for the short character introductions before matches are rather nice. My favourites are the first one you hear, and the grungy beat of the second one at the midpoint. Those little Genesis twangs just really tickle my fancy. Likewise, the music for the bean stacking matches themselves are also enjoyable, making full use of the Mega Drive's funky instruments too. It's like almost sounding like a microgame from WarioWare or something. The midpoint gives us a more frenzied sped up version of this tune, and late game opponents have this more serious machine sounding track that loops quickly, but I still like the track. I admire that bouncy bass. The final boss theme is this kind of mellow yet sinister tune that snakes its way into your ears, periodically scattered with this epic drum beat that pops off every few seconds. It suits this version of Dr. Robotnik in a serious situation, I suppose. It speeds up when you're close to beating him too, adding a tense sense of ferociousness towards the end of the game. Now onto the remixes. The extremely fast and bopping music used in the 2-player mode. It's blood-pumpingly sharp in its choice of chords and instrumentation. Makes sense that it was the final boss theme after all. Exercise mode has, well, hands down the best theme in the game, that was also carried over from Puyo Puyo. It helps that it doesn't loop as quickly as the other tracks, so you can really appreciate the tune longer. It was used for later game opponents originally. The theme for the password screen is actually somewhat somber, a cheerful if melancholy tune that was used in the opponent screens before matches in the original game. When Robotnik flies in all mad before his boss battle, the music that plays is a pneumatic melody filled with whirling boops and notes which pierce through. In Puyo Puyo, the theme is reserved for the cutscenes of late game opponents, and is much slower and has nearly a whole minute of music before it loops. The roll call scene after the game is finished has music that is relaxing and cheerful. In its source game, that's considered the main gameplay theme and is played during most of the matches. The music that plays as the names of the development team breeze by is a relaxing tune, really gives the experience some closure. It was also used as the credits music in Puyo Puyo, which it also borrowed the background going from sunset to a starry night transition from, although it occurs much quicker in Mean Bean Machine. And that's everything worth noting here. It's a decent puzzle game with a good OST, very befitting of one of the more oddball Sonic games on the Mega Drive. But before moving on to the cartoons, let's take a quick look at the game's legacy and how it was ported to later consoles. First off, like a fair number of the 90s Sonic games, Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine was ported to the Master System and Game Gear. This 8-bit version is graphically and audibly inferior to an equal extent. Enemy introductions were removed, and the AI doesn't have any subtle differences in their strategies anymore, and the cutscenes are stilted with even less movement than before. But there are some aspects that are actually an improvement compared to the original. For one thing, there's a puzzle mode, a whole new side game with optional challenges. I love the menu looking like a notebook written by Dr. Robotnik. It adds a level of character to the doofy guy. In the Master System version, there's this silvery opponent lineup showing off all of the guys at once as you progress through the main game, showing the name of the one you're about to challenge. I kind of prefer this one, actually. It really reminds me of Mega Man. Or I suppose that board from Gunstar Heroes would be a more suitable comparison. Has-Been has also been relegated to only the exercise and 2-player modes, where he once again acts as the silly referee who sometimes helps you clear beans from the dungeon. In the Game Gear version, apart from the screens being more squished, has the enemy roster screen against a black background. Some of the arenas in the last third of scenario mode have a more metallic border around them, along with some rundown machine parts to make the battles look just a little more grueling. And the credits screen has a blue-coloured background instead of a dark void. Yeah, that's certainly an 8-bit port, alright. Surprisingly, both versions of the game have been granted ports on later hardware, mostly as a part of compilation packs. Notable ones are Sonic Mega Collection for the Nintendo GameCube, which was where I got first introduced to the game, and Sega Mega Drive Classics for various consoles. The 8-bit one, for very unknown reasons, has seen the most re-releases, specifically the Game Gear one. It was a bonus game in Sonic Adventure DX Director's Cut, from collecting 130 emblems and clearing 10 missions. It was included in Sonic Mega Collection Plus, the plug-and-play games console, Freeton's Fun Play 20-in-1, and lastly, Sonic Origins Plus, as of this video. Weird? Where's all the love for the Mega Drive one? You'd think Sega would prefer to showcase their more polished, very enjoyable 16-bit version, but hey. At least dedicated fans are keeping that game alive, such as in the form of Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine DX Edition. It was an entry for the Sonic Hacking Contest of 2020, and it's got a couple of appreciated touch-ups to make it feel more like a Sonic game. The first thing that caught my attention was the little blue guy himself, replacing Has-Been. He looks so chibi. There's an X mark to clearly indicate where beans drop down from. The opponents' names are shown during matches, as well as including some new and/or remixed music included in the soundtrack. The cutscene dialogue has been changed a little to address the player character as Sonic, while indulging in puns here and there, and it's pretty much got everything you need except widescreen support. I am aware that some fans didn't like that this was simply a reskin of another Sega property, so perhaps this hack is for those specific people who strictly prefer the Sonic cartoon vibes. Man, Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog was such a wild ride. I sure wish I could talk about it. When I was a young baby Holmes, oftentimes I'd play Sonic games with my old cousin. He'd humour me with games I had never heard of before. I'd let him be player 2 in Sonic the Hedgehog 3. And before being introduced to the other two, I kind of experienced the games backwards. And we'd sit our energetic asses down for 11 minutes and watch The Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog. It was a very, very hyperactive take on the franchise. I believe at the time I had Sonic 1 and 2 for the Mega Drive, so I was very familiar with the Blue Below at that point. Regardless, we just enjoyed it for what it was, which was, well, I guess we'll see. Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog, abbreviated to by fans, started off with a pilot, which right now hasn't had an official release on television or online and is nearly classified as lost media. However, some of the footage will be reused for commercials, some episodes, and the slapstick credits scene of every episode. Put together the same year Sonic 1 was being made, all I will say is that the pilot was very much like the first episode, but with some off-key differences and errors.
They never should have changed the color of Tomatopotamus's legs.
First officially airing on television channels in 1993 and aired on syndication for the rest of the year, this cartoon had Sonic the Hedgehog, chili dog enjoyer, hanging out with his adopted fox buddy Miles Tails Prower as they constantly put a stop to the evil plots of resident insane person, Dr. Ivo Robotnik, and his two henchbots, Scratch and Grounder, who aim to help their boss take over Mobius. There's also Coconuts, but he needs to be higher ranked before he can be considered a main character. Created by Deke Entertainment, this cartoon had a lot of staples of its era: a wisecracking but likeable main hero, a villain and his henchmen and their repeated schemes, crazy worlds and landscapes and frequent one-off characters, the writer's secret fetish, and stylistically silly hands-drawn animation. The only things missing would be a magical artifact to protect from the villain, and ongoing romantic tensions with a female character, although Sonic does smooch a mermaid at one point. The voice cast are a wide variety of guys who recorded their lines in Vancouver, except for Sonic's VA who was in Los Angeles. Let's start with him. I think it's safe to say that Jaleel White was quite influential as an actor, both as a physical performer and with his voice work. As Sonic, his zesty 90s era hipness is honestly a perfect fit for the Hedgehog. I'm glad they kept him on board for the next two cartoons. He really embodies the cool, radical vibes the Hedgehog had given off since the character's inception. If classic Sonic had a voice, you'd bet it'd be him.
It's good for you, little guy. Makes you appreciate the simple things, like fresh jalapenos on your chili dog.
Christopher Welch adds a sense of youthfulness to the young Tails. It helps that he was an actual child at the time.
He'd never help you crumb bum!
Long John Baldry. Now, if you could name a Sonic cartoon voice actor with as much cultural influence as old Jaleel, then his performance as the world's sexiest fat man shall not be overlooked. His brash British accent, the way he rolls his R's, and the boundless energy in his vocal deliveries was remarkable in making this version of Robotnik unforgettable, and also just really fun to listen to.
I hate that hedgehog! Why is my precious rocket ship drifting off into deep space?
Gary Chalk as Grounder and Phil Hayes as Scratch, two members of the Super Special Sonic Search and Smash Squad, 5S Squad for short. I probably have these two living in my brain rent-free thanks to their dopey and humorously shrill voice work. They suit the dumb henchman archetypes very well.
You go by, I drop it down, and the hedgehog knocks himself out! She's beautiful, Doctor!
Yeah, she's got really big
hair!
Other recurring characters, or just ones I think are rather neat despite being totally loony, are Wes Weasley, a skeevy salesman who helps either side for personal gain, Professor von Schlemmer, a kooky mad scientist and ally of Sonic, Breezy, a femme fatale type invented by Robotnik to charm Sonic, though she soon turns against her programming, Robotnik Jr., a selfish robotic son invented to be the heir to the throne, so to speak, who also turns against his creator, Mama Robotnik, who would burst in every now and then, and yes, she is essentially the big bad in drag, sometimes. Katella, a bounty hunter from space, who is extremely hard for the Doctor. Dr. Warpnik, Robotnik's insane cousin, imprisoned by him in what is essentially the special zone, right down to having fish there. And Dr. Brandon Quark, a half-duck hybrid guy who looks more like a Crash Bandicoot villain the more I stare at him. A lot of these last ones are typically one-off villains, but they remain in fans' memories for their unique personalities and the show's weird humour, among other reasons. Grouped with this insanity, there were a fair number of identifiable game references. Aside from the Badnik antagonists being based on enemies from Sonic 2, there are a couple of locations loosely based around zones from the video games. Dr. Robotnik acquires a super form thanks to the Chaos Emeralds, or twice I suppose, that one without Chaos Emeralds. And a whole episode that was basically a Sonic Spinball adaptation, and that wouldn't be the first time they utilised that concept. And that's about it for accuracies to the games. At the end of most episodes, though omitted in most original UK and most US airings, for some reason, there would be PTA segments. These would warn their young viewership about what not to do in society, covering subjects such as smoking, peer pressure, climbing into a washing machine, and this viral clip.
Kids, there's nothing more cool than being hugged by someone you like. But if someone tries to touch you in a place or in a way that makes you feel uncomfortable, that's no good.
What? Oh yes, the memes. Perhaps as a mix of nostalgia and fondness for the quirky style and vocal deliveries, some voice lines gained a notoriety during the budding years of YouTube and became memes in the fandom. These would circulate outside fanbase circles when they came to be included in YouTube poops, satirical and often obscene video mashups in which cartoons were often the subject. YTPs as a whole are an art form, and you cannot change my mind.
Patrick, fired!
This is also where perhaps one of the most well-known aspects of this cartoon was popularised, the Pingus, which was clipped from this one voice sample from Dr. Robotnik. We were generally amused by anything in the mid-2000s.
Snooping as usual, I see.
That quote alone has found itself referenced in other Sonic media due to that being so widely used. I think one more aspect worth noting is the music. Like the art direction, it has a surreal, nonsensical vibe going on. The backgrounds in particular make it seem like everyone exists in this colourful wasteland with peculiar textures in the sky. A couple of recurring riffs include renditions of classical music, In the Hall of the Mountain King and Flight of the Bumblebee come to mind. But some of the exclusive tracks truly tickle my silly musical itch. The theme of Dr. Robotnik sticks out in particular, it being just as common a leitmotif as the Sonic 1 and 2 title music that plays during the opening and other scenes. Also, sidetracking a little, but I swear Robotnik's theme in the cartoon inspired some of the Sonic the Hedgehog movie soundtrack, because either Robotnik's leitmotif, especially in his introduction theme, sounds very similar. 65 episodes of this cartoon would be made, the last of which standing out quite a bit. Airing in 1996, 3 years after the previous episode, Sonic Christmas Blast felt less like a final episode and seemed more like a transitionary period for the show that Deke would produce next. As you can see, there are SWAT-bots, no Sonic Says segment, Robotropolis, the conquered industrial city, makes an appearance as the villain's hideout, here pronounced Robotropolis. Princess Sally makes a cameo appearance, and the general atmosphere and sound design, while still unabashedly silly, steered more towards more grounded 90s cartoon sound effects. This was Sonic SatAM, but like a version of it suited for the Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog universe. It has been discovered that the original title for the finale would have been An Extremely Sonic Christmas, or variations of it, evidently as a tie-in to the unreleased Sonic Extreme. But since that game never came out, they had to course correct and have the episode name reference Sonic 3D Blast instead. What a way to end off this diabolically zany show. But Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog wouldn't be the first cartoon Deke created involving the Blue Boy. Far from it. We have 2 other cartoons to cover. So for now... well... golly, imagine growing up with like 2 different Sonic cartoons, sharing some of the same talent, and yet the contrast couldn't be any more sharp. Premiered the same month as I'll just call it Adventures of, Sonic SatAM got its fan name from how it would air on Saturday mornings, and to differentiate itself from the other show and its weekday airing schedule. While the previous show was a surreal hodgepodge of concepts with very little continuity, this one had an ongoing narrative that escalated in seriousness every now and then. I understand the general consensus, particularly in the 2010s, was that Adventures of is baby poo-poo garbo, and SatAM is better by comparison for its story. But personally, I think it's not so black and white, and that both of them have elements of seriousness and goofiness, especially in SatAM Season 2. Good God. Instead of a colourful desert, there's barren, polluted landscapes. Instead of Scratch and Grounder, there's Snively and Cluck, although the latter would quickly be phased out in favour of giving the former more screen time. Rather than a tall mountain base with a golden Robotnik statue, there's this giant, vaguely egg-shaped construct that looms over the cityscape. SatAM's very concept seemed to be the antithesis of the previous show. I watched each episode in me teens, hot off the hype from Archie Sonic back in the day, and while I wasn't quite as keen on it as I had been on the previous cartoon as a kid, I was still fond of its heroes, its villains, and the ongoing narrative it confidently built. So, what is the plot of this more serious version of a blue hedgehog foiling a mad doctor's schemes? Let's dive in. In the year 3224 on planet Mobius, following their triumphant win in the Great War, the inhabitants of Mobotropolis live in peace. They are ruled by King Acorn, a kindly if naive fox dude. I say naive because he has several scheming bad guys under his nose, including Julian, the head of the War Ministry, alongside his nephew Snively, and Ixis Norgus, a powerful sorcerer who acted as Julian's superior before being cast away into the void, a kind of empty subspace. Anyway, Julian steals the plans for the roboticizer, created by Sonic's Uncle Chuck, secretly reprograms the army of swapbots, and soon overthrows the city, taking on the name Dr. Robotnik, turning the conquered city into the polluted Robotropolis, and transforming many of the captured citizens into mindless robots. I said the word robots so many times in that sentence. However, not all is lost, as a group of kids had escaped into the Great Forest during the incident, soon forming a little base of operations for the refugees, Knothole Village, and forming the Knothole Freedom Fighters. This team consists of Princess Sally Alicia Acorn, daughter of the king and often the brains of the operation, Sonic the Hedgehog, their wisecracking leader of the Freedom Fighters, who enjoys a good chili dog, Tails, the sweet if reckless kid sidekick, Antoine Dupardoux, sorry if I mispronounced that, a French accented member of the Royal Guard who'd probably be scared of his own shadow, a Bunny Rabot, a super strong half-robot rabbit with a big heart, Rota, the technical expert and the mechanic of the group, and Nicole, Sally's handheld computer who specialises in hacking and whatever features are most appropriate for the situation. There are other allies and separate freedom fighter factions, like Lupe, this very popular character, as you can tell from her features, but the main focus is on these guys and their interactions. The fandom adores the Knothole Freedom Fighters, and I can totally see why. The not-so-subtle romance blossoming between Sonic and Sally in a war-torn wasteland, the group bickering and yet putting their heads together to get through episodic obstacles, the way they look after Tails, they really are the heart of the show. I may be more accustomed to their characterizations and backstories from the Archie Comics adaptation, but that doesn't stop this show from being decent in its own right. However, low ratings and competition against other programs would see ABC cancelling the show 2 seasons in, which is honestly aggravating considering the plot points it planned to address. A sad foreshadowing for things to come for Sonic media. Season 1 and 2 were very clearly differentiated, unlike Adventures of, which were practically seamless in their transition. In particular, the visuals and tone became much brighter and humour-focused like in its pilot, which certainly diminished the dark atmosphere, though it still wasn't completely lost. Some characters had slight visual changes, with Rota getting the most notable redesign. Dr. Robotnik was given sillier moments, and the mechanical reverb in his voice was removed. And Dulcie, the hero's scatterbrained mount, would be introduced. Don't Google her. The story would climactically reach its peak in the two-parter flashback episodes, and would go to even greater heights at the finale. Oh boy, Dr. Robotnik vanishes alongside his Doomsday Machine after his base gets fricking obliterated. The heroes believe they have won as Sonic and Sally make their romance officially official, and Snively reappears thinking it's his turn to cause problems. There were of course plans for what would happen in an eventual season 3 and 4, but yeah. Already the vibes of this cartoon differed from both the previous cartoon and the games, but this more grounded direction had viewers and fans hooked. One of these things may have been the voice actors that really fleshed these characters out. If you watched Rugrats back in the day, you might recognise some of these guys. Kaf Soki voiced both Sally and Nicole. I honestly cannot imagine any other voice for these two. Sally just sounds so right.
Will you be serious for a minute?
30 seconds is my limit.
Christine Cavanaugh was Bunny Rabbit. Even if it mainly sounded like Dexter or Chucky Finster with a Texas drawl, it still helps the character exude this relaxing warmth.
Now, don't worry yourself none. That little sugar hog is too quick for some sleepy old wizard.
Kris Summer was the voice of Dulcie, Bradley Pierce was Tails, Mark Ballou and Cam Brainerd were Rota's voice actors, and Michael Bell was Norgus's, the latter of which I cannot help but just imagine Chaz Finster with a bad throat cold.
I will ask the questions. Where is the hedgehog?
I couldn't sleep for days.
Sonic's voice actor was carried over, now giving the Hedgehog the chance to express more emotions than just silly, and Jaleel White still got it, still including the snarky undertones throughout.
Those guys.
They used to be people. Then Robotnik fed them through his robo machine, and now they're robots working in his crud factories.
Rob Paulson voiced Antoine, and the dude has mad range, so it's no surprise that he can pull off the accent and mispronunciation on the wrong syllables for humour.
Yes, a fuel! Why is this world so difficult to understand?
Jim Cummings as Dr. Robotnik and the Swatbots, another prolific voice actor who does a bang-up performance. His inflection was reminiscent on the one he used for Razul in Disney's 1992 animated film Aladdin, but much deeper and with a hollow reverb in Season 1 episodes, though still effectively villainous in the second one.
Welcome, Hedgehog. You're right on time. Get ready, Snively.
Oh, it just makes me tingle all over. Yes!
Fun fact, he also voiced Dr. Robotnik in the unreleased pilot of the Adventures of cartoon, though his voice was much more like Pete there. Charles Adler does a pretty neat job as Snively too. He confidently carries that aloof yet disgruntled henchman vibe. Also, he can do one heck of a scream.
Oh no! Yes, sir.
Who was that?
I really don't know, sir.
Lastly, the King was voiced by Tim Curry. He doesn't ham it up like you would expect from most of his roles at the time, but when he does, he goes hard. It's a tad jarring a change.
Julian plotting against the throne. A serious allegation, Sir Charles. You'll regret this, Julian! You'll regret this!
So, at the risk of repeating my points, that's pretty much everything to note about SatAM when it was aired, I suppose. I'll talk about the plans for Season 3, which were woefully lost, though keep in mind these are very much conceptual in nature. We wouldn't know what they would have outed in the final version. God bless writer Ben Hurst. He really fought for a Season 3 even before he passed away, being active on Sonic forums and at fan expos, trying to get a Sega-approved movie produced, which would be shot down when human rubbish pile Ken Penders presented it instead, and seemed like a very dedicated and passionate creator. I hope I can give his unused ideas justice. This is the top 11 stuff that would have been a thing had the show continued. Why top 11? Because it looks like a pair of boots, innit? Number 11, Sonic Mars. Okay, this is kind of cheating, but there were plans for a 3D looking game for the Sega 32X, with some of the SatAM cast, but it too was cancelled for a multitude of reasons I don't feel like getting into, maybe in a future Sonic Extreme video. Number 10, the Freedom Builders. Now that Robotnik seemed MIA, the Knothole Freedom Fighters would change their name and aim to rebuild the now empty Robotropolis to its former glory. It would have been spearheaded by Rota and finally giving the dude something to do. Number 9, Nate Morgan. Classic Archie Sonic fans might recognise him, but his character was established here during development, just not used yet in the final product. Instead of a short scientist, he was a tall environmentalist wizard and a former advisor to the king. Number 8, Sonic's shift in character. Probably a minor thing, but in Season 3, our titular Hedgehog would have had character growth after the defeat of Dr. Robotnik. Indeed, Sonic would have been really bored following their victory in reclaiming their old home, and would be itching for a new purpose, while taking new threats more seriously and yet revelling in the excitement. While still wisecracking as usual, his shift into a more mature mindset as the stakes were raised would have undoubtedly been cool to see, if it happened. Number 7! Good day all, RobotnikHolmes here. Number 6, Tails' growth. Much like with Sonic, the Fox sidekick would see more urgency in the plot, and develop into a more capable freedom fighter to keep up with Sonic on adventures. He would have also been more rebellious, and take matters into his own hands, even saving Knothole from destruction one time, although we don't know the specifics. Number 5, Snively takes over. So the last scene in the show had Snively reappear from the rubble with a sharp new outfit and eyebrow whiskers. It wouldn't have been the new status quo in Season 3, sadly, though I assume it would have been a good chance to see how he does while sitting in the doctor's seat. He would have resorted to bringing back Norgus, Robotnik and a manipulated king from the void, who would be the new main antagonists of the show going forward. Although following that, Snively, having been reduced to such a bit role, would swap sides to the Freedom Fighters to get back at the bad guys, although he would attempt to betray them anyway, being outsmarted by Antoine of all people. Number 4, Knuckles the Echidna. Yeah, I haven't got any visuals for this, but it was written that Snively would have brought in Knuckles the Echidna, Sonic's biggest rival figure at the time, to deal with the Hedgehog. While we know little of his involvement in the show, he would have been promoted to main character status by the time Season 4 would come out. That evil pair of conjoined eyes at the end of Season 2 were meant to belong to the Echidna, being a last-minute addition by the director, before that too was changed and replaced with Norgus returning during Season 3 drafts. Speaking of which, number 3, Ixis Norgus' return. Don't think they were going to keep this guy in the void forever. Freed from his prison by Snively, Norgus would have been the new big bad with his team of flunkies. In the end, either in Season 3 or 4, the king would come to his senses and drag the wizard back into the void. Kind of anticlimactic, really. Number 2, Nicole's backstory. Hey, so Nicole, Sally's sentient pocket computer, she used to be a regular little girl before Mobotropolis got invaded, and Julian took her in to participate in a research project. But then he'd transfer her entire personality into a supercomputer. She still had sentience, however, and after predicting future outcomes where she causes a bad future, she conspires a plot to change her appearance, alter everyone's memories, and ending up in Sally's hands, who would name it after Nicole, her old friend. And that's not even scratching the surface. It's all on Ben Hurst's notes site, so go check that out if you want to read the full story. Number 1, it was Earth all along. Yep, Archie Sonic fans might be familiar with this one. So Planet Mobius would have, in reality, been planet Earth hundreds of years into the future. After humanity's disappearance, all the wildlife would have evolved and become Mobians, the planet's main inhabitants. But where does that leave Robotnik and Snively, the only humans of the cast? Well, they were from the year 2200 and were mutineers in a space station. However, it would blow up and inexplicably send them tumbling into the distant future. Seeing themselves as superior to these sentient animals, it would have been here where Robotnik plotted to rule the now radically different world. Most of these ideas, I'm sure, are very familiar to comic readers back in the day, as writers on Archie Sonic would pull from the unused idea box and reincorporate them, sometimes with a sci-fi twist. These would include Mobotropolis being rebuilt, Sonic growing bored from peacetime, the existence of Nate Morgan, as redundant as he was as a character, the planet having been eradicated of human life by aliens as revenge for one of them getting dissected, by one of Robotnik's ancestors no less, and Nicole being in a physical body. The comic ran with a lot of these concepts, and at its peak, Archie Sonic gave the best SatAM experience for fans, both before and after it got rebooted. One day I will talk at length about this comic series, but I'll save that for another time. So Sonic SatAM went out with a bang, left many who tuned in yearning for more, and had on their hands a passionate fanbase and creator who were more than willing to continue engaging with this cartoon adaptation. Then, in 1999, Sega pitched an idea for Sonic to have two siblings and play music and... I'll be honest, I don't have much of a personal connection to Sonic Underground. The only snippets of his existence I would read were on Sonic Fan Wiki subpages, and even then, it didn't look that appealing to me. My friend Kieva would soon force me to sit down to watch some of the episodes, and we would revel in just how bizarre a product it was. The show looked like Sonic SatAM, even sharing specific characters, designs, and settings, most of which in name only, but were stranger on the eyes, like it was Sonic SatAM from an alternate dimension. So, why was it this way? I don't know. In the year 1999, back when the Sega Dreamcast was on the horizon, Sega wanted to advertise their franchise to a global audience. This included Sonic, who was getting his own fully 3D platforming game soon. So did they collaborate with their old cartoon buddies Deke Entertainment? Carve the way for a new era of Sonic cartoons? Let SatAM continue where it left off? Yes and no. They made a whole different cartoon from scratch, this one more of a mix of Adventures of and SatAM in terms of tone and whimsy, intentional or otherwise. They had the same writers from SatAM, but I imagine they too didn't know how to handle this assignment either. In retrospect, I don't think this cartoon did much good for the company. Sonic Underground got a small yet loyal fan base on the long run, but I imagine this is not what 90s viewers wanted, and this show got even worse ratings than SatAM. Despite how it might have been perceived at the time, it's still worth appreciating as one of the classic, often overlooked Sonic cartoons, so let's get right into the story, characters, and voice actors. Yes, I'm merging them all together because boy do I talk a lot about these sons of bitch. Sonic, your favourite food is chili dogs, why are you eating the nature? The story this time around revolves around 3 siblings separated at birth, as is ordered by this seer dude to fulfill a prophecy that would return peace to Mobius. These 3 kids are Sonic, the snarky fast boy voiced by Jaleel White, Sonia, a self-centered but well-meaning rich girl voiced by Jaleel White, and Manic, a punk rocker with a mohawk and a heart of gold, voiced by Jaleel White. This guy better have had like 3 paychecks for this.
I am never stepping foot in a sewer again. It's dirty, it's smelly, and it's disgusting.
Hey, that's my home you're talking about, princess.
The children of Queen Alina, voiced by Gail Webster, are soon reunited after Mobotropolis had been violently occupied by the tyrannical dictator Dr. Robotnik, voiced by Gary Chalk, evidently promoted to Big Bad after voicing one of his henchmen in a previous cartoon.
Assign a special task force to this. When we find it, Sanctuary will become Cemetery.
He's occupying all of these cities and roboticizing them, although roboticizing in this universe is more just like adding mechanical parts to their bodies, although it still has the same effect. To continually try to stop these 3 buggers from fighting the elusive queen and overthrowing him like the prophecy says, the good doctor hires 2 bumbling bounty hunters. Sleet, voiced by Maurice LaMarche, a cunning wolf dude with a jarringly soft Peter Lorre impression.
And more importantly, how can we twist this situation to our advantage?
And Dingo, voiced by Peter Wilds, the dim-witted muscle who gets transformed into things every episode, though it always ends up mucking up their plans one way or another. Also opposing the trio at one point, although quickly warming up to them, is Knuckles, voiced by Brian Drummond, the sole resident of the floating island with a dinosaur sidekick. Hey, at least he's not alone anymore.
I hate thieves!
There are a couple of other recurring members of the cast who would soon come together to form this continuity's version of the Freedom Fighters. Cyrus the tech expert, a returning Uncle Chuck, Trevor the mission guy, Bartleby Montclair, an upperclassman voiced by the dude who did Scratch, and other one-off characters. Yeah, the cast is rather vast and varied, but they don't have nearly as much depth as the Freedom Fighters, and really, the focus is, deservedly so, on the trio getting the upper hand through the power of rock and looking for their mother. Also, like SatAM, the Sonic Underground cartoon got cancelled before it could fully flesh out its narrative, although what concepts were planned is unknown, and nobody seems to want to talk about it. Right, can we talk about the visuals and music? Because, good lord. Okay, so the game design characters are like they were before, kept the same but with a few minor colour differences. However, while the vague outline of the art style was kept, that doesn't account for the other colourful dudes throughout the show. Scarcely few characters look fine, with every other one having overly stretched proportions in this ugly art style. Most of the cast is inherently unappealing, even if the story relies on their presence and fleshed out personalities. It's clearly trying to imitate the vibrant, unorganised design of other shows, but mucking up the style when haphazardly merging it with the Sonic cartoon aesthetic. It's bizarre. Like, remember in Archie Sonic when they started leaning towards an anime-esque aesthetic while still awkwardly retaining its Western foundation because most companies just didn't quite grasp the appeal anime had in the 2000s? I feel this show has some of that same energy but with like hyper-stylized cartoon shows like Invader Zim and Shaolin Showdown. Hot take, I understand. The animation too is rather disorganised, although I suppose it adds to the show's sense of style. Like, not judging. Overall, it looks interesting. Not bad, just very peculiar and truly a time capsule of what the late 90s cartoon shows were like when they were trying to be cool and in your face. The use of musical instruments is probably a factor of that, and it gives the show its own identity and manages to stick out in both the show's OST and, like, scene transitions. They also included a musical number in every episode, and used at the point for characters understanding the moral of the story and whatnot. They were mandated to be there, supposedly. This is all just my opinion, and the vocalists they used to voice the trio do a fine enough job, but the songs included feel not just tacked on, but of not very good quality. The animation is already inconsistent at best and absolutely error-ridden at worst, as the musical moments reuse footage to a ludicrous degree, including these wildly perplexing visual effects. Worth noting, there are some bangers in the soundtrack, as much as I rag on it. The opening theme and No One Is an Island spring to mind. It makes for potential meme material, though. In its 40 episodes, there's not really any standout moments, except that time the heroes caught a sight of Robotnik as a good guy, and them as the city's ruthless rulers. That's the episode where this gif came from, by the by. There was that time the siblings travelled to Mobodoon, and even then I think it's just so Manic could say this line.
Now Mobodoon is Mobodoon.
Knuckles' introduction episode, and also that Athair is a character in this show? You know, Knuckles' great-grandfather from the Archie comics adaptation. This episode came out 4 years after his debut, and that is interesting. Good thing Mike Gallagher didn't get his knickers in a twist over it. And there was also that time Dingo absorbed the energy of what is essentially a Master Emerald-looking Chaos Emerald on Knuckles' turf and gained an uncontrollable gloop form. Shall we call it Perfect Dingo? I believe the legacy of this show is chiefly remembered through these main characters. The idea of Sonic having long-lost siblings is bizarre and certainly doesn't fly with Sega's current rules, though Manic, Sonia, and even Queen Alina are still fondly remembered, even with the mum's somewhat Hippocratic monologues. And Sleet and Dingo, despite being the most unorthodox-looking henchmen a version of Robotnik has ever had the misfortune to hire, are nonetheless remembered in earnest. Them having such charming voice actors perhaps cemented that. In the end, this show clearly would have been a better project had the team been given the time and budget to see their vision to fruition. It really would have made for a good cartoon alongside the other ones. Maybe someday others would check these shows out. They still get re-released every now and then. As for this one, I can see the appeal of this cartoon, as off-putting as it was for many a viewer, and while I never grew up with it and am thus viewing it under a modern-day lens, it's really apparent how this show got its fanbase, and I respect that. So, as an Adventures of and SatAM fan, high five to you Sonic Underground peeps. Keep on being cool, keep that flame burning, and let's continue cherishing the Blue Hedgehog's animated history. God, how do I even end this video? I suppose I'll talk about its legacy? That's what I usually do. I think it's safe to say that these cartoons are nostalgic for anyone, 90s viewers and Sonic fans alike. If SatAM wasn't as beloved as it was, the Archie Comics adaptation wouldn't have been as long-running as it was. Pre-reboot, they even had a story particularly take place in Sonic Underground in its multiverse, effectively making the two continuities canon to it. And it would have had a proper ending adapted in an issue of Sonic Universe, but the team were never given the clear on that, because nobody at Sega of Japan wanted them to touch the bloody thing. Archie Sonic Online though, now the sky's the limit with these guys. This talented fan community came together to form the website to produce a webcomic continuation of where the old continuity left off. They are far from the only attempt at this, but they are certainly the most successful in their ambitions. And looky here, there's a fan-made conclusion to Sonic Underground. I won't spoil it, but if it can make a non-fan feel emotional over it, I'd say it's very effectively done. OK KO Let's Be Heroes, an American animated series that first aired on Cartoon Network in 2013, contains some of the zany charm adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog possessed, even having some of the cast as very similar archetypes, though they do subvert them a tad. The character of Lord Boxman in particular took inspiration from a number of villains, including SatAM's Robotnik with a touch of silliness like in his Adventures of version, and was also voiced by Jim Cummings. The show soon had Ben Bates as character designer and model sheet artist, who had contributed to the Archie Sonic book back in the day. I guess the dude went full circle in his career when they did the episode of Sonic and Tails in it. Oh yeah, remember when they had that crossover episode with like the game voice actors on board? That was hecking wild. There were a number of familiar vibes, quotes, and music tracks, all of which I'm absolutely certain was because these guys grew up with the Adventures of cartoon and Sonic OVA. Like, this scene in particular is... whoa. The Sonic SatAM cartoon also has a fan-made continuation, the ever-expanding group collectively known as Team Season, with a 3. It's all 2D animated, and in their attempts to continue the story where Season 2 left off, using any notes left by the writers, they aim to give the show the proper Season 3 it deserved, with the most amount of detail and dedication I've seen in, like, anything Saturday morning cartoon inspired. The teams are relatively active on socials, and honestly, super freaking keen on how this project goes. That announcement trailer was awesome. It was so cool how they got the singer of Crush 40 to do the rendition of the title theme, nicknamed Fastest Thing Alive. Ben Hurst would be proud, you guys. It's undeniable that while these cartoons are pretty vintage by today's standards, especially after 3D animated media became more prevalent, faint echoes of them will forever live on in modern Sonic, even if that also includes memes.
Say the line, Bart!
Snooping as usual, I see.
And Mean Bean Machine, well, that lives on in the fanbase's subconscious, one way or another. It was brought back in Sonic Mania as a surprise boss battle, although the sound effects were ripped from Puyo Puyo instead of those from its reskin. And in turn, games like Puyo Puyo Tetris had Sonic make an appearance, although real missed opportunity to not include Eggman to complete a fully fledged homage to that silly old game. If Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine were to be rated, placed alongside the rest of the Sonic games in the franchise, I suppose it would be in a D tier. It's quite the oddball in comparison to the platformer titles, but it's there if that is what you'd prefer. While I appreciate it for what it is, you'd sooner see me play hoverboard racing games rather than puzzle ones, I'm afraid. And thank you for watching this video until the end. This was one of the longest, most ambitious videos so far, simply due to just how much I wanted to talk about the game, the shows, and every little nugget in between. Regardless of how long I rambled on, I do hope this at least left feelings of nostalgia for similarly old-fashioned Sonic fans, or brought attention to a portion of the franchise peeps had not yet engaged with. I live for gushing about this sort of stuff, so if it makes any new fans, then heck, I'm happy for that. In the next retrospective video, I'll be giving Sonic Spinball a go. It's another non-platformer, kind of, but it will be neatly contained in a 30-minute video. I'm calling it now. Thank you ever so much for watching, if indeed you still are, and I'll see you in the next video.
hedgehogs right outside my...